Well, welcome to Testimony Mountain. So glad that you're here with us today. And Veronica Swift is here. Have
Yay.
you on, Veronica? And if you don't mind just sharing where people can connect with you.
Sure, glad to be back. It's been a while. I had a summer, an interesting summer, so it's nice to be back in the swing of things. So I blog and I have my own website at veronicaswift.blog, blog. And I also blog on Substack at veronicaswiftblog.substack.com. Those are the two main places you can find me. And then I'm also on Facebook and Twitter and um, Instagram and Locals, which is it's kind of a Patreon site, but it has a lot of interactivity ability, I guess you can call it. So people come there and can ask me questions, and it's a way to support me and support the blog, which, like we talked about last time, you let me drone on for an hour about all the blog stuff, which was very nice of you. You didn't fall asleep once. That was lovely. Um, but the website has costs, so that's one way you can support me if you want to. Or if you don't want to read the articles, you can always go there. It's $2 a month, and then you can ask me questions and interact, and that's kind of cool place to be. A little bit of safety because only people who are actually subscribed can actually write comments and see the comments. So it's a little bit, it has a little bit of privacy that other places don't have. So I kind of like that. It makes me feel a little safe. So that's where you can find me. And yep, there you go.
All right. And I loved one of your recent blogs that I think it was public free. I don't know, but
Yes,
uh,
yes.
on kind of that Christian infiltrator type of thing, which is really, really hard for people to grasp the concept. We tend in the church to, you're either good or you're bad. And the idea that somebody could be passionate for Jesus and have an exemplary life and also have a cult background and be doing bad things at night is really, really hard for most people to comprehend, and especially as survivors it is really hard to comprehend. And that is actually my case. I was programmed to be a Christian infiltrator. And that has been really difficult as memories come in of that. Um, and so I thought maybe we just chat a little bit on that topic if that works.
Yeah, let's do it. That article, it was actually, I found it on a Svali's website. She included it. I believe she included it on one of her older blogs. I don't even know if you can find that
Yeah.
particular website anymore or not, but there, and also I think it's in one of her books, and she reprinted it from a man that I'm guessing she had contact with, or who gave her that information in that article because he wanted to publish it. And essentially he was um, an illegitimate child of a very well-known, very high-level Rothschild, Edward de Rothschild. The de Rothschilds are the French group versus the just plain old Rothschilds, which are more the British and American and other locations group. But I guess when they moved to France, they had to become de Rothschild instead of just plain old Rothschild. Um, so he grew up with this man, Edward de Rothschild, and uh, as he explains it, you know, his birth father, Edward, really had a dislike for God, a serious dislike for God. And I searched for quite a while because I have about 400 recordings and transcripts of another survivor who has also talked about the family that she worked with, it just being very vicious and very nasty about God and about Jesus, just doing a lot of um, talking with her. They were talking with her because she was a Christian at the time, talking with her about how horrible God was and how awful Jesus was and what a terrible person to follow he was. So I don't think that's, at least from those two examples, I don't think that's very uncommon in the occult. Do you have any experience with that?
Actually, I do in the sense that my brother is that way. And
Yeah.
it kind of shocked me one Thanksgiving a couple years ago. Um, it was around the political time, and it first started out with his girlfriend, and she was talking about these horrible, nasty political things that she'd gotten in the mail, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, and she was like, I would never vote for this candidate. It's so horrible. And she went on and on and on. And she was like, the things that she was standing on was God, faith, and family. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a problem, you know. And then later on, and I'd never seen this in my brother, but he just started going on a tirade about how awful Jesus was and how much he hated him. And I had never seen that side of my brother. And so obviously both from a cult family. And so I think he got the very much anti-Christian programming, even though my mom, is a Christian. My dad's kind of more new agey, but um, yeah, so I think that they like to polarize things and, either, putting you in as a, passionate seeking the Lord or this anti-hate God, type of mentality. I don't know.
Yeah, it sure seems like they do that with a lot of things. They want you divided, and divided against yourself, right? You have two ideas in your mind, or they try to instill two ideas in you, and then you've got to choose one or the other. This was actually one of the things they forced him to do was to choose between life and choose God. So if he chose God, they would kill him. And if he chose life, that meant he would have to follow Edward, his birth father, in his hatred for God. So that kind of duality, I've seen that over and over, and heard of it over and over in the occult, that's important to them. Number one, and number two, they use it to divide the loyalties and put children in, a Hobson's choice, a catch-22 position, where it doesn't matter what they choose, it's going to be not great in the end. It's not going to be what they want necessarily in the end. Um, and I think some kids do choose to end life. I've heard other stories that are just horrific, where they say, I'm just not going to go that direction. I don't want it, and I'm going to stop now. And it's sad, but it's also, I think, for them, freeing. There's a sense that I have that, you know, there's almost a living death of choosing life and choosing to be on earth and having to go through the struggle that you do as a survivor to get out from underneath all this stuff. So I certainly don't blame anybody at all who chooses not to take that path. It's just a sad thing to me that they force kids into that, those two choices. So yeah.
And I would say the other part of that is for those of us like from the Jesuit system who have multiple presentations, is that they will polarize the presentations. So like my US presenter was, is a passionate Christian, and yet I'm discovering other presentations in other countries that are very anti-God, and in that hate God. One is, more goth, very, very dark persona. And so that's another way that the cult, does that duality split. So, yeah.
Yeah, divided against yourself then inside, which is really hard. It's hard to have that because as he kind of describes it, and in other places where I've seen it, it also it offers up problems with attachment. So that's kind of a psychological term that, and I'm not really trained in psychology, but it's something that I've seen over and over again, where babies need security, children need security with a parent or a parental figure, with the community that they live in, with the people that are around them, and having that kind of divided, um, forced division within yourself means that you can't ever be securely attached to anything. And so that provides all sorts of, um, deep problems as an adult, is what I gather anyway. So I think a lot of people spend their entire lives trying to refine that or create that again, that attachment, that feeling safe and secure in the world. And the occult doesn't want, from what I can tell, it just doesn't want you to feel safe. If you're always on guard and always on, walking on eggshells or wondering what's coming next and you never feel secure, I don't know what exactly they do with that, but it seems like it's an advantage for them.
It is. And I would say in my own case, my ex-husband was depressed and angry the majority of our married life. And because of that, I was always walking on eggshells and I couldn't ever focus on me. I was glad that he had some level of breakthrough, and he wasn't so depressed and angry. And that actually freed me to feel safer. And, that's when memories of my past started coming in for me to be able to process. Now, ultimately, he couldn't handle that and, chose to leave. But yeah, that definitely is part of the process.
Yeah, so it sounds like that lack of attachment, you can perpetuate that then in your marriage or in other relationships, then ooh, that's quite a way that they manage to keep you unhappy. And yeah, if you're constantly on your toes, if you're constantly feeling like the next thing that happens could be a trigger, it could set you off, it could, and you're never comfortable. That's a hard way to live. I have felt like that in certain situations. In fact, I kind of feel like that now because there's a lot of things swirling around me, and doing this writing, and it's perpetually unsettling.
And that's kind of, part of the whole scenario. And a lot of people think, oh, if I just pray the right prayers, do the right thing, find the right person to pray for me, I'll get healed. But the reality is that when we didn't have that foundational piece of attachment, we were created to need that. And so we need places not just where we have healing prayers, but also where we have safe community to connect and begin to establish those safe attachment bonds, because that's normal, And unfortunately, most counseling, psychology, those types of things, you're supposed to have this distance. And if you start to become attached in any way, then they'll refer you to someone else. Well, you don't get to that place of being able to have safety enough to work through those things. Um, and so
Yeah.
that's, part of what we do is looking at how do we, build that community where you can feel safe and you have people that you can be real with and you're not walking on eggshells. So,
Yeah, I think that's really rare. I think you're doing a fantastic, I don't know, I don't have a great word for it. Bang up job, great job, fantastic. All of those apply. It's pretty darn rare to find groups that provide that at all, much less for survivors. So that's a really nice and wonderful thing. Hopefully, it'll be a model for other groups as well. Hopefully, you get it built, and then you can teach other people how to do it and where the pitfalls are and where to come out of that. Because yeah, I see this with a lot of people who contact me privately, and there are groups of individuals and who contact me privately and give me information. Most of the time, I can't publish it, but it just helps my information, to understand what I'm doing, what I'm writing about, and what's important to them, and how certain language may affect them, or certain words are triggers, or and all those things are really important because you can't. I can't be sensitive to other people if I don't know these things. And coming from the outside, they're like the hidden gems. They're the things that are really important but aren't talked about because they are so triggering and so, I would say, so attachment related that, if you use them, you're gonna basically blast the person straight away from you without even knowing that you're doing it. And that's one thing I get concerned about. And I hope I learn enough so that I can begin to start bridging survivor, non-survivor, because I think that's that's a key relationship that also needs to be developed. It's a wonderful thing to be in a community of just survivors, but I don't think it's fully healing. I
no,
think you have to be able to integrate with the rest of the world as well, and that's a hard step. It's a hard step for both sides because one side feels like everything they do is wrong, and the other side feels like, why don't they know? Why don't they
yes,
know me? Why don't they understand me? Why am I? Yeah. So that's another thing I liked about this article in particular because it goes into a lot of the details that just nobody really understands. And a lot of people don't believe, like a lot of people don't believe that Joseph Mengele ever came out of Germany or that he came to the US or that he, was basically all over the world. And that's one thing that this article says is Mengele was um, one of this gentleman that wrote the article. His name is Kim Campbell. and Mengele was one of his first programmers. So Mengele was all over the place from what I see in many, many, many survivor writings. He was, I don't know, they hired him, they paid him a lot of money from what I can tell to do horrific things to their children. So,
Yeah.
and one of the things they did is they tried to well, they killed him. And this is also another thing that is very, very common in the occult. They will put children to death deliberately, whether that's by drowning them or by, putting them in a coffin and burying them alive, kind of a deal. I'm sure there's more I don't even know about. But they do horrific things again to create these awful scenarios in their life, and then they bring them back up or back to life or whatever. I mean, they've got, from what I can tell, they've got a lot of different ways they can bring people back to life, either with just medical techniques or by witchcraft. Um,
Yeah.
and then they give these choices. Do you want this death? Do you want it to go? You want it to be permanent? Do you want to come back and live on Earth? And there's such a strong, I mean, I don't think most people don't have a, a feeling that they want to die. It's usually, especially kids, you have a strong will to live. I think it's baked into most people. So they kind of are given a choice, but not a choice because they expect them to live.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's sur-
to have this done over the 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 umbrella of loving God as God the Father, as God as your the person who can save you from death, essentially, is just it's a mess. It's hard to even describe. Like, I'm tripping over myself even trying to describe it, but it provides so many binds and entanglements and mental conundrums, that and emotional conundrums that seems like it takes a lot to untangle all of that.
It does. It's not easy at all. And this past year, I did have memories surface of being programmed by Mengele. And so,
Mm.
I can testify to the horrors of, what that means. Um, and, like you said, that difficulty of life and death choices, because God did create us with a will to live. And the cult wants to take us to that brink, but they don't want us to go over it. So, in Svali's book, she talks about, when there is you know, starting to fail with the infants, how they have to stop all the programming and switch to comfort and attachment and even some control and manipulation by saying, your brother and sister are going to die if you don't, live. Um, and again, those impossible things as an infant, as a child, little child, you believe what you're told. You don't realize that it's not true.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes they do fake the deaths. I think in the article I wrote the week before, that's also free on Substack, I talked about how they um, often, well, one of the scenarios is that there's a fight between Jesus and Satan, and Satan will kill Jesus. And whether that's real or not real, sometimes it's real and sometimes it's not real. But to a child, they often can't tell the difference. It's like a play, and they don't understand that it's actors acting, and that it might not be real. It's a powerful thing for a kid to watch um, difficult things like that happen. And that's why we don't let kids go to R-rated movies, right? So because they're not ready for it mentally. So to force them into that is really a challenge for them.
And that's the thing is so many people are like, well, why don't you just get out of the cult? And they don't understand so many of the twists and turns and how difficult it is to walk out this journey. And to even trust God or trust other people can be very, very challenging because of those early, childhood programming and attachment bonds. So it
Yeah. How many people do you suppose are in from within the occult system? What percentage of the kids that are put through that are slated or destined or programmed to be infiltrators within the church, whether that's a Christian church or any other denomination. I'm sure they infiltrate other denominations as well. But how is this a small percentage or fairly substantial?
I personally believe it's pretty substantial because, as that article talked about, this is meant to be setting up for the Antichrist and for the great falling away. And I can definitely see traces of that. I can see, different ways that I was used towards that goal. And again, they they put you in these double binds of, for me, the one that they used most was killing babies. And so the
Mm.
rationale, for me was, okay, they're giving me the choice of doing this job for them, infiltrating the church, or they're going to kill these babies. Well, Christians, are against abortion and they want to save the babies. So the logical choice is to do this job, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's how they would manipulate me. And again, when you have been raised in it and you don't realize that there are other choices, um, well, my choice was always to save the babies, even if that meant doing something, against a church. And so
Yeah.
it's,
What kinds of things, I'm curious, because I don't, what kinds of things would they have you do, or were they training you to do? Like, what do they consider infiltration?
there's a whole range of different jobs that you could have. Because I was skilled in relationships and could easily, like every church we went to, we would immediately gravitate towards leadership. Um, and so I believe that I was meant to be the opening door. And then my ex-husband was coming in to do some of the other things. Uh,
Mm.
and so that's one way. The other way is false doctrine. And so for a time being, we were in some stuff that had a mixture of false and true. And for a time, I was part of that and wasn't even realizing some of the people that we were promoting were actually cult, related types of things. And so I've had to really repent a lot for that, and walking away from that and just being before the Lord. I ask that you would cleanse everything and even the stuff that I did back then for the cult. I believe that his promise is he works all things together for good. I have to stand on that. And the verse in Colossians where, it says we're transferred from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of his love. And I believe when we have been used by the enemy, in powerful ways, we get to ask the Lord, please, you are the God of restoration. Can you, work this out? And I believe
Yeah.
he does. I believe there are ways that he does in the midst of having to deal with terrible, awful guilt at the things that, I participated in. Again, I didn't feel like I had a choice um, at that
Yeah.
time, but still, it's devastating.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't even imagine. It's beyond, I think, most people who have not been through that to imagine what it's like to have to keep your nose above water or not feel like you're drowning under the weight of those emotions. Mm. So, one of the things that Kim says in this article is the real Christian's life and the Lord's will for me eluded me for so long because of my multiplicity. Do you think that that's one reason they, in a broad sense, uh, do what they do to children to create parts in them?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would say, I was a Pharisee of the Pharisees in that, I kept all the rules, did all the right things, thought I had a relationship with God, but I didn't know what the real was. I just knew
Mm.
how to be a good Christian. And I looked like a saint, always keeping all the rules, always doing the right thing, and all of those kinds of things. Um, and it wasn't until, memories began to surface of my journey that I realized my true need of the true Lord Jesus. And now I understand the cross in a way I never did before. And, definitely deeper relationship with the Lord. I can still have parts who come out and go, you're a hypocrite. Are you even saved? And all of those kinds of things,
Yeah.
that as survivors we struggle with. And yet I know that my true heart is for the Lord, and that most of the things that my parts did were survival, and a lot of it to protect me and to protect others, and thinking they're doing good things, and that you know is from a good heart of wanting to protect. So try to keep that in mind instead of going, oh, I did all these evil, horrible, awful things, and I'm just bad, bad, bad. Um, but
Yeah.
recognizing the training and programming and torture and all of those things that went into it. So
Yeah. So do you think that each, I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that each layer that you uncover and each situation that you go through and heal or work on healing, uh, every layer that gets dissipated in that process, do you think that it, it do you think that it cuts your ties both with the occult but also deepens your relationship with God? Is it like a teeter-totter kind of a thing?
in some ways, yes, I would say the general process. However, it's very discouraging for a survivor, and it's easy to just give up because there are times when it's like, this is just too much. And the effort to get out is so painful and the consequences so severe. Reading Svali's autobiography and being able to relate to some of the things that she went through, and the possibility that in some of those instances I would have been present, are very, very impactful. And so um, the way I personally see it is that, well, like you could read verses like in James where it says, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. And, for a
Yeah.
multiple, it's like, okay, well, I'm done for. I'm permanently unstable, and, I'm doing the best I can to get wholeness, but I can't in and of myself. I need both true family, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and I need healthy community to support me on this journey. And it's a long journey. So am I just unstable and I can't make it? I don't believe that's the case. I believe that as we have done the best that we know to submit fully to the true Lord Jesus, that his grace covers us as we're walking out this journey. And so uh,
Mhm.
that's where I have to rest in. Otherwise, it's torment, to go, am I cut off enough? The way the cult
Yeah.
works, they like you to get to a plateau and you think that you're healed. And you may be sharing your testimony everywhere and you look like a great Christian, and yet you still may have back parts that you're amnesic to that are still doing cold activities. And it's hard, even as survivors, to believe that's true because consciously, I would never want to involve in any of that kind of thing. And yet, you know, as the healing process goes and you find more layers, you go, oh my goodness, things are still happening. And so trusting, what it in my conversations with the Lord, what he said is there is a line that they can't cross. And so
Mm.
I have to rest in that, and trust in that, on this journey. So
Yeah. That's important. I think there's a line they can't cross. Finding that line might be difficult, but at least knowing it's there, that sounds like a good thing. I was thinking back to what you said before, and and then we went on a different fork. So back to the other fork. Um, one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm relearning Christianity with the added knowledge of the occult, because boy, you can learn the Bible, but if you don't have like if you're missing some basics, like if you're missing that spirits are real and Lucifer is real, and no, this isn't just a mythology, a lot of it's real, and basically the entire Old Testament um, is a story about God trying to figure out how to how to make all that nasty stuff go away, then you've got a single layer of the Bible that isn't very deep. And I see that a lot. There's a couple of books I have that I read that were basically a Jewish philosophy of the Bible, and I read them now. I've read it before I understood anything about the occult, but I read it now, and I'm like, wow, there's so much more depth to this if you add in information about the spirit world, and you add in information about different realms, and if you believe that spirits are actual beings and they are real. And I think, I don't know. For me, it it makes what Kim calls in this article the mainline churches, the quote unquote popular denominations. It makes what they're teaching to us almost, um, I don't want to say false, but in a way it is almost false because it takes into account like only half of the reality. And they almost, at least the mainline church that I grew up in, mainline Protestant denomination, they almost didn't talk about the Old Testament at all. I mean, they'd read readings from it, but it wasn't like there was a discussion. There wasn't a go back. There wasn't here's what Jesus said, but this is the reason why, and go back and explain the depth of any of the Pentateuch or any of the early writings in the Old Testament. So I'm having to go back and I'm having to start over and relearn and reassess some of the Bible, in fact, most of it, with the added information. And some people don't, for some people that I've talked with, they don't really agree with that. They don't think that it's necessary or sufficient or even a good thing to incorporate any of this into my understanding of what the Bible is, why the necessity for Jesus to come, the depth of that. It's so much more deep when I have added in this information than before. In fact, before it was like almost yawn, like, oh geez, this isn't, why, who cares, this isn't very, it's not very interesting. And the whole Bible was just not very interesting to me before. And I think that's because when you take it as a mythology instead of a reality, there's a chasm between those two ideas. And Kim talks about this. The mainline church is the ecumenical movement. He writes the Word of Faith movements, elements of the Vineyard movement, especially within the charismatic heresies of a quote spiritually resurgent Methodism and Presbyterianism, among others, the whole Christian occult, etc. Um, he's basically calling out almost the entire width and breadth of modern Christianity, at least in the United States. And I have to say I think I agree with him at this point. And then you add in what he says about Oral Roberts, and I've looked into Oral Roberts, and he was definitely an occultist. Um, uh, Men like Billy Graham and his son Franklin Graham, who are definitely occultists at different and varying degrees, but still, big timers in both worlds, Christianity, the Christian movement, um, the faith-based movement, even the prosperity movement is rife with occult ideas passed off as Christianity. And I would never have guessed this if I hadn't read and learned what I've learned now. And I look at most of Christianity and I think, are they all going to fall
Mhm.
to the occult doctrine when it's passed out? Are they all going to accept it? And I can't say no to that. I can't say no to that because I don't think most people have an understanding of the Bible that they would have if they understood just a little bit about occultism. So that kind of was what I think drives me to write, because I want to educate a little bit of the world. I think if they can understand a bit about it, they'll be better off. I don't think they have to understand every nitty-gritty detail, but I think the more that the general public has a bit of information, the better off we'll be. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I totally agree, Veronica. And that is the sad part for me is that, I was used to bring about that great falling away. And the Bible says that it will come. And I do see that, it's ripe for it. But I do believe there's hope in God and that He does have a way through. And I believe that survivors are God's secret weapon because of what we've gone through. And as we come out, our testimony, I believe, may be similar to the early church, where, you know, sharing the passion of who Jesus is and exposing these things so that people can come out. It it is just one of those things that is heartbreaking to see how much the gospel, the true gospel of Jesus Christ, has been watered down in a lot of variety of ways, and yet God does have a plan of restoration, and His desire is for all to be saved, and so we get to put our trust in Him and in Him alone in walking this out. And so I don't want to be negative towards churches. They have a lot of very key infiltrators, and that doctrine or those messages filter down, and people just kind of pick them up. And so some people who are teaching these things may not realize what they're actually teaching and where it's headed. So not everybody is cult, but the more and more we can understand the true, the better. And it to me, the Bible comes alive when you begin to see actually the traces um, of the cult all throughout Scripture. And I can't remember who it was, but recently pointed out about Moses and obviously he was raised in the Pharaoh system, and so he would have been taught all the occult practices uh, and would have been participating. He wouldn't have had a choice. He was raised in it as a child. And, there's this verse in Jude where it talks about Satan coming after Moses passed and wanting his body. And, we read that over like, well, okay, I don't get it. And someone recently, can't remember who it was pointing out, well, the reason is because Satan believed that he had claim because of Moses's early years. And then, the Lord stood up and said, nope, this one's mine. You don't get his body. And and so, again, these little places, we honor Daniel and think he's great, and he is. But here's the deal is he would have been in Babylon, he would have gone to occult school. He
Yeah.
was trained in all the occult practices. And yet God had him there for a reason. And so Daniel and Moses give me courage to go, okay, if they can get out and be participating in the glory of God with Daniel, even in the system, with Moses getting the people out of the system, there's hope for me. There's hope for others who are working on this. So,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hope. I think that I think it was Doug Riggs, who's a pastor of a church in Oklahoma, I think just outside of Tulsa for quite a while. And he wound, if you're not familiar with him, he wound up with a lot of um, survivors in his church, and then he moved, I think, to New York, near Syracuse or in Syracuse, and he continued working. But he said at one point that if he had known in the beginning what he knew at the end, he could have shaved like 17 years of therapy off for his the first people that he helped. So I think it's all a learning process, and whether you're the first person in the queue to try it out, or whether you're the benefit of all the previous years of wisdom, um, there's definitely hope, because there's definitely people around who will do whatever they can to help people get out. And there's a lot more information available now than there ever was before. In fact, I'm drowning in information now. It's prompted somebody to call me some pretty nasty names recently, because I do collect a lot of this information. But I think it's important. It's important because all these stories are important. People's testimonies are important. Their life experiences are important. And the more that people can see themselves in others, I could say, okay, here, this man, Kim Kimball, yeah, he may have worked his entire life to get free of the evil that Mengele and his birth father inflicted on him in the first years of his life. But maybe that will make somebody else's journey a lot shorter or a lot easier in some ways, just to have that knowledge. So, yeah, knowledge is power. I think that's a cliche, but it is true. And I think for survivors, understanding other survivors, it I think unlocks a lot for them, if I'm not mistaken. At least that's kind of what I see happening is reading certain life testimony pieces from a variety of survivors can trigger um, unlocking things in themselves that then they can use to heal much faster than they may have been able to before. Sometimes it appears to me just to be like an awareness thing. It's a timing thing. It's a bringing the unconscious to the surface. So that's kind of why the occult doesn't like me, because I bring a lot of those things to the public. So
Yeah, I would fully agree in that. But people are different in how they relate. Like for me, I was hungry. Once that box started opening up, it was like, I need to hear and get more information because I feel like I'm going crazy. And at least if I can hear somebody else's story, maybe I'm not so crazy, that type of thing. Um, but other people are afraid of their story being contaminated, and so they don't want to hear and don't want to listen.
mm,
I honor that choice. I would say, though, to me, the benefit of getting the stories and testimonies out is far greater than to not have that. And I believe that there's less contamination than we think. I think part of that is programming. So that's just my personal opinion. We have so much unbelief and denial programming in that it's always this, well, I'm copying someone, or maybe I'm just making this up. And that's a reality that we have that programmed into us. But the truth is, a lot of it is our story, and they want to keep it hidden. So.
yeah, there's a really, really interesting double video set. I think that's supposed to be 3 parts, but only 2 parts are out now, that I've just run across. I think it was published this past week. It's about the imagination, and it's out by Gina Phillips,
Mhm.
who is a former therapist and person who works with survivors. And what she has said in that is really profound. Just a bit of it that I am trying to understand, but that relates to what you just said, is that the occult works a lot with the imagination, and the imagination to us can seem very not real, but to the occult, the imagination is the bridge between the spirit and the soul, and it exists in a realm, which, if that's another kind of occult word that isn't going to make much sense if you are just coming into this information, and I'm not sure I can explain it very well, but it's an actual place in the spirit world, and pieces and parts of your own self can wind up in these realms created by the imagination plus alchemy or other kinds of witchcraft or magic. And that to me was key in understanding why some memories for some survivors seem real or not real. Because if they are operating with survivors in the realm of the imagination, it's not going to be a third dimension earthly memory, reality memory. It's going to be a different quality, and it's not going to feel like an earthly memory does. It's going to feel, I would imagine, very different than that. So I think that, yeah, that there's a lot packed into those first two videos, but that was a takeaway that just popped for me. I'm like, well, no wonder survivors must think that their actual memories of what went on for them aren't real, because those memories are from a different space and time. They're from a different place. And so maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong, but it struck me, and I thought, ooh, that's important.
Yeah. And I think there's different ways of looking at it and different ways that they do that for, in the Jesuit system where they're separating out these presentations. Like, as far as I know, consciously, I was always in the US my whole life. And yet I probably only spent a few months in the US a year. But because they would take videos and I'd watch videos and virtual reality and different things like this, and the way dissociation works, I believed that I was always in the US. But your point is accurate in the sense that recently I'm in a relationship, and as he was describing his childhood, it had a different feel. It was the first time I'd realized the difference than when I tell my stories to him of my childhood.
Mm,
Uh, and so there was that difference that I began to see and notice just in the quality of it, in the description of it, whereas probably a lot of the memories that I have were because I watched videos of me. I mean, it looked like me, it was my identical twin doing different things. And, I was programmed to believe that that was me. But
yeah.
that has a different quality of feel than someone who is actually experiencing it, if that makes sense.
It does. I think that underscores my previous point, though. It's really important to have interactions with non-survivors too, because there's no way that you may have gotten that kind of information, and that's valuable information for you, by talking to someone who'd had the same thing done to them. You'd have the same quality of memory, but finding it distinct from someone who didn't. Yeah, it's really interesting.
And I didn't get a chance to say that before, but fully in agreement with you that survivors and non-survivors need each other. I believe there's things that we have that are helpful to non-survivors, and we need non-survivors.
Yeah.
Walk out this morning. So
I definitely need the knowledge that survivors have, because, like I said, it makes the quality of Christianity vastly different, just vastly different, and much, much deeper and much more interesting and much more relevant. And, I say multidimensional, but it's like opens up a whole second or third or fourth set of possibilities versus the Bible can seem very flat, if none of that happens. So I'm very grateful for survivors for sharing what they know and opening up that to me for sure. And, yeah, I think both ways is important. But it's hard. Relationships are hard. So how to make them work and how to bridge that gap, that's the question.
it's not easy, and I really appreciate the non-survivors that I know who are willing to walk this journey out and to not just dismiss, what happened to me and others, and are willing to invest time and space, into this journey. It really means a lot.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of interested people, a lot more than are willing to talk because it's just not a friendly atmosphere. The public atmosphere can be very, very unfriendly. Um, but I think what I see anyway are some definite pockets of individuals who are like myself find such value in this information. It deepens my life, and I think it deepens theirs as well. So hopefully, we just keep spreading the word and talking about it, and it'll make a difference.
Definitely. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. This has been such a joy, Veronica, to have you here and be able to talk about these topics openly. And just want to encourage those of you who are watching, some of the things that we shared may be startling or maybe like, how could that be? And all of those kinds of things. And just encourage you to take it to the Lord, get confirmation from Him, dive into, some of Veronica's blogs, her book, and other resources to understand this topic in a better way so that we can all walk in overcoming power. And so just want to thank you, Veronica, so much for being on today. And we'll look forward to seeing all of you next time on Testimony Mountain. Bless you.